Okay, so good day, everyone. Good day, classmates, especially to you, Ma'am Chloe. So for today's discussion, we will continue to report um, the other novel types that was discussed by Rainiel and Jihan Makahelos. So for today's discussion, we will continue to report other novel types together with Miss Dali Jumento, and we will discuss the later periods in English literature. Our topic focuses on the 20th century to the contemporary period. So the objectives of this discussion is that students will be able to identify the other novel types from Victorian period. They will be able to discuss the movie Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen and relate it to the women in Victorian period. They will also discover why the novel is widely studied in English classes and reach wide audiences. And the other one is that students will be able to understand the symbolic nature of the character in The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. So here we have the topics to be covered. First is the other novel types of Victorian period. Second is the Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And the third one is The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. So the 20th century opened with great hope, but also with some apprehension, for the new century marked the final approach to a new millennium. For many, humankind was entering upon an unprecedented era. So the 20th century was dominated by significant events that defined the modern era. These are the Spanish flu pandemic, World War I, and World War II, nuclear weapons, nuclear power and space exploration, nationalism and decolonization, technological advances, and the Cold War and post-Cold War conflicts. So since it is the 20th century, this focuses mainly on the technological advancements in literary aspects. Now, so they explore core themes including anti-colonialism, democracy, socialism, nationalism, industrialization, nuclear weapons, and globalization, and provide their own personal interpretations of the century, just like what I had discussed earlier, as well as their respective nations' experiences and historical memory of the era. Since the 20th century mainly focuses on the World War I and World War II, they have a history, and their historical memory serves as their main topic in their literature. Now, modernism is a major literary movement of the first part of the 20th century. The term postmodern literature is used to describe certain tendencies in post-World War II literature. So the spirit of modernism is a radical and utopian spirit stimulated by new ideas in anthropology, psychology, philosophy, political theory, and psychoanalysis. It was in the air, expressed rather mutedly by the pastoral and often anti-modern poets of the Georgian movement. So the changes took distinct shape in the literature of the 20th century modernism, a movement that was a radical break from the 19th century Victorianism, led to postmodernism, which emphasized self-consciousness and pop art. So the impact of World War I upon Anglo-American modernists has been noted. So in addition to the war brought a variety of responses from the mere traditionalist writers, predominantly poets who saw the action or the happenings. Rupert Brooke caught the idealism of the opening months of the war, and he also died in service. Now, Siegfried Sassoon and Ivory Gurney caught the mounting anger and the sense of waste as the war continued. So we can see that in this era, this focuses on the war that is present in that time. Now we have here Pound, Lewis, Lawrence, and Eliot. They are the principal male figures of Anglo-American modernism, but important contributions also were made by the Irish poet and playwright William Butler Yeats and the Irish novelist James Joyce. So we are familiar with William Butler Yeats because the other reporters have discussed his writings. Now, from 1908 to 1914, there was a remarkably productive period of innovation and experiment as novelists and poets undertook in anthologies and magazines to challenge the literary conventions, not just of the recent past, but of the entire post-Romantic era. So for a brief moment, London, which up to that point had been culturally one of the dullest of the European capitals, boasted in avant-garde to rival those of Paris, Vienna, and Berlin, even if its leading personality, Ezra Pound, and many of its most notable figures were American. So, the impact of World War I upon the Anglo-American modernist has been noted. In addition, the war brought a variety of responses from more traditionalist writers, predominantly poets, who saw the action. So, the main focus here in their literature is what happens in the war. So that is their content of their writings. It was not until the 1930s, however, that much of this poetry became widely known. In the wake of the war, the dominant tone, at once cynical and bewildered, was set by Aldous Huxley's satirical novel Chrome Yellow in 1921. So you can search that, entitled Chrome Yellow, 1921, by Aldous Huxley. Drawing upon Lawrence and Eliot, he concerned himself in his novels of ideas Antic Hay in 1923, Those Barren Leaves in 1925, and Point Counter. So the writing of the interwar period had been great breadth and diversity, from modernist experimentation to new documentary modes of realism, and from art as propaganda. So we have discovered, or we have discussed, or we have encountered the word pop art earlier. So to conventional fiction, drama, and poetry produced for the popular market. Since the war began, many people or many writers focuses on that because they witnessed, or they have something to say about that happening. So they have more knowledge and they can contribute to their historical literature. So the next topic is other novel types. So other novel types will be discussed by my group mate, Miss Dolly Jumento.
Good day, everyone. I am Dolly Stephanie A. Jumento, and I will report the other types of novel. So first, we have picaresque. In Spain, the novel about the rogue or picaro was a recognized form, and such English novels as Defoe's The Fortunate Mistress can be regarded as picaresque in the etymological sense. but the term has come to connote as much the episodic nature of the original species as the dynamic of roguery. So the requirements for a picarist novel are apparently length, loosely linked episodes, almost complete in themselves, intrigue, fights, amorous adventure, and such optional items as stories within the main narrative, songs, poems, or moral homilies. Perhaps inevitably, with such a structure or lack of it, the driving force must come from a wild or roguish rejection of the settled bourgeoisie life, a desire for the open road with adventures in bedrooms and meetings with questionable wanderers. So, this type of novel shows acts of dishonesty or playful mischief. It also relates to the adventures of a rogue or low-born adventurer as he drifts from place to place and from one social milieu to another in his effort to survive. So kani siya nga novel no is it typically adapt a realistic style kay di ba some women or even men andaman nga mobuhat og mga panlimbong or mga pagpaninoplok para lang makasurvive kay at the end of the day they will be able to kanang makakaon sila ma-provide ilahang needs or luho like sa atong panahon karon we need to adapt to our environment to survive. It's we call it the survival of the fittest. So these are some examples of picarist novels. So as I have mentioned earlier in the previous slide, Roxana, the Fortunate Mistress, was Defoe's last and darkest novel. It is the autobiography of a woman who has traded her virtue at first for survival and then for fame and fortune. Its narrator tells the story of her own wicked life as the mistress of rich and powerful men. A resourceful adventuress, she is also an unforgiving analyst of her own susceptibilities, who tells us of the price she pays for her successes. Endowed with many seductive skills, she is herself seduced by money, by dreams of rank, and by the illusion that she can escape of her own past. So, ang atong mabantayan gud din hino sa work ni Defoe is the term realism and picarist are very frequently applied to his fiction as all-encompassing critical terms. Each of these is examined and defined ostensibly. When applied to the novels, they are found to be useful in revealing Trousseau's jeopardy, Maule's innocence, and the problems of the ending of Roxana. However, such general critical terms obscure the development within Defoe's fiction, from the thematic confusion of Crusoe to the more integrated and organized Roxana. The Roxana was considered as picarist because the main characters wanders about and has adventures among people from all social classes and professions, often just barely escaping punishment for her own lying and cheating. So she is a casteless outsider who feels inwardly unrestrained by prevailing social codes and mores, and she conforms outwardly to them only when it serves her own ends. So next slide, we have sentimental. The term sentimental in its mid-18th century usage signified refined or elevated feeling, and it is in this sense that it must be understood and Rousseau's Nouvelle Heloise. So the debasement by which the term sentimental came to denote a self-indulgence in superficial emotions occurred in the Victorian era. Under the influence of sanctimony, religiosity, and a large commercial demand for bourgeoisie fiction. Sentimental novels of the 19th and 20th centuries are characterized by invertebrate emotionalism and a deliberately lacrimal appeal. So stuck emotions are always easily aroused through stuck devices, but both the aim and the technique are generally avoided by serious writers. So class, remember nga ang sentimental novels, rely na siya sa emotional response both from readers and characters. They feature scenes of distress and tenderness, and the plot is arranged to advance both emotions and actions. The ability to display feelings was taught to show character and experience and to shape social life and relations. So the following are examples of sentimental novels. As you can see here, the novel Nouvelle Heloise is sentimental in a way that it exhibits a passionate attachment between the sexes that arises above the merely physical. The vogue of the sentimental and love novel was one of the features of the romantic movement. So usa ni siya sa features sa romantic movement, and the form maintained a certain moving dignity despite a tendency to excessive emotional posturing. So next, we have psychological. The psychological novel limited itself to a few characters whose motives for action could be examined and analyzed. It first appeared in 17th century France. So in here, it is a more primitive fiction that are characterized by a proliferation of action and incidental characters. The psychological novel limited itself to a few characters whose motives for action could be examined and analyzed. In England, sa England daw, the psychological novel did not appear. So, murag wala gud siya ni-exist until sa Victorian era ra, when George Eliot became its first great exponent. It has been assumed since then that the serious novelist's prime concern is the workings of the human mind, and hence much of the greatest fiction must be termed psychological. So, psychological novel first appeared in the 17th century in France with Madame de la Fayette's Princess de Cleves. The category was consolidated by works like the Ab Prévost Manon Lescaut in 1731 in the century following. So the great disclosure about human motivation have been achieved more by the intuition and introspection of novelists and dramatists than by the more systematic work of the clinicians. So guys, dili pasabot ani nga abi kay psychological na angalan, sige ra na siyang related sa medical field ha. So psychological long fiction is most easily categorized not according to medical theories, but according to four literary techniques: playful etiology, unrepentant confession, stream of consciousness, and Kafka's fantasy. So as you can see here, class, mauni some famous works sa psychological novel. So in here, the novels of Henry James are psychological in that the crucial events occur in the souls of the protagonist, and it was perhaps James, more than any serious novelist before or since, who convinced frivolous novel readers that the psychological approach guarantees a lack of action and excitement. So next, we have epistolary. So the novels of Samuel Richardson aroused out of his pedagogic vocation, which arose out of his trade of printer, the compilation of manuals of letter writing, a technique for young ladies. So his age regarded letter writing as an art on which could be expended the literary care appropriate to the essay or to fiction. And for Richardson, the creation of epistolary novels entailed a mere step from the actual world into that of the imagination. So the novel is composed of a large assortment of different documents and recordings, including not just letters from characters, but also newspaper, diary entries, dictation cylinders, and telegraphs. The last two representing up-to-the-minute technologies in Stoker's day. So the result is not just polyvocal and multimedia, but also effectively suspenseful since um, since the reader is being privy to all of the novel's materials, frequently knows more than any single character and can see what is happening or going to happen more clearly than they. So Stoker, in other words, it uses the epistolary form to maximize Gothic terror and suspense. So here are some examples of epistolary novels. Okay, so here it is work from Samuel Richardson. Richardson's Pamela in 1740 and Clarissa in 1748 won phenomenal success and remains groundbreaking in various aspects. So it was written by Samuel Richardson. Pamela is widely regarded as one of the earliest novels in the English language. So as Richardson himself was one of the greatest ones in the 18th century. The novel is also arguably the first novel to introduce epistolary as a style of fiction writing. So it's written as letters from one character to others. The said novel, with its free outpouring of the heart, was an aspect of early Romanticism. Next, we have pastoral fiction. It is a pastoral novel. So this is a fiction that presents rural life as an idyllic condition with exquisitely clean shepherdesses and sheep immune to foot root is of very ancient descent. Lungus Daphnis and Chloe, written in Greek in the 2nd or 3rd centuries CE, was the remote progenitor of such Elizabethan pastoral romances as Sir Philip Sidney's Arcadia in 1590 and Thomas Lodge Rosalind in 1590, the source book for Shakespeare's As You Like It. So this kind of novel is a class of literature that presents the society of shepherds as free from the complexity and corruption of city life. So ang themes ani niya, it may include notably love and death. So ang ato ang mga examples ani is kaning Rosalind by Thomas Lodge, Arcadia, and To the Lighthouse. So kaning ka Sir Philip Sidney, so si Sir Philip Sidney DI was an English courtier and poet. Arcadia was dedicated to his sister, Mary Herbert. The Countess of Pembroke was a work in the new genre of prose romance. So it traces the adventures of the Princess Pyrocles and Musidorus and the fortunes of the Duke of Arcadia. So it is a pastoral romance. It courtiers disguised as Amazons and shepherds make love and sing delicate experimental verses. So next, ani is apprenticeship. So the Bildungsroman, a type of novel about the upbringing and the education, seem to have its beginnings in the Goth's work, Wilhelm Meister's Lehrjahr, which is about the processes by which a sensitive soul discovers its identity and its role in the big world. So kanisha dinhi nga dapita, it is a story of the emergence of a personality and a talent with its implicit motives of struggle, conflict, suffering, and success. It has also an inevitable appeal for the novelist. Many first novels are autobiographical and attempt to generalize the author's own adolescent experiences into a kind of universal symbol of the growing and learning processes. Kani nga biographical novel nag-concentrate gud ni siya sa individual's youth and his social and moral initiation into adulthood. So for example, ani is kanang it is how about the character or the protagonist of the novel can adapt in the art of life by passing through definite stages like his success, his failures, his improvements, until at last he becomes a master or skilled. So like kanang kita no kanang magkagulang na ta since pagka childhood into adulthood, like muna siya pasabot nga kanang like journey, like apprenticeship sa ato ang kinabuhi until we become expert or master na ta kaayo sa ato ang mga ginabuhat or sa ato ang or we have a specific kuana good kanang we are skilled in a specific aspect. So these are works under apprenticeship novel. So as you can see here, Copperfield by Charles Dickens and Great Expectations by Charles Dickens also. So Charles Dickens embodies a whole Bildungsroman in work like David Copperfield in 1850 and Great Expectation in 1861, but allows the emerged ego of the hero to be absorbed into the adult world so that he is the character that is least remembered. H.G. Wells, influenced by Dickens, but vitally concerned with education because of his commitment to socialist or utopian programs, looks at the agonies of the growing process from the viewpoint of an achieved utopia in The Dream in 1924 and in Joanne and Peter in 1918. So this concentrates on the search for the right modes of apprenticeship to the complexities of modern life. So next, we have anti-novel. So the movement away from the traditional novel formed in France in the form of Nouveau Roman tends to an ideal that may be called the anti-novel, a work of the fictional imagination that ignores such properties as plot, dialogue, and human interest. So it is impossible, however, for a human creator to create a work of art that is completely inhuman. So the anti-novel, it usually fragments and distorts the experience of its characters, presenting events outside of chronological order and attempting to disrupt the idea of characters with unified and stable personalities. So some principal features of anti-novels include lack of obvious plot, minimal development of character, variations in time sequence, experiments with vocabulary and syntax, and alternative endings and beginnings. So extreme features may include detachable or blank pages, drawings, and hieroglyphs. Contemporary French writers like Alain Robbe-Grillet in Jealousy in 1957, Nathalie Sarraute in Tropisms in 1939, and The Planetarium in 1959, and Michael Butor in Passing Time, 1957, and Degrees in 1960, which mainly to remove the pathetic fallacy from fiction in which the universe um, is indifferent to man. It is made to throw back radio reflections of man's own emotions. So individual characters is not important and consciousness dissolves into sheer perception. So even time is reversible since perceptions have nothing to do with chronology, and as Butor's passing time shows memories can be lived backward in this sort of novel. The very appearance of the novel, traditionally a model of the temporal treadmill, it must change. It will not be obligatory to start at page 1 and work through the end. So a novel can be entered at any point like an encyclopedia. So the two terms most heard in connection with the French anti-novel are cosims and tropisms. So the first, with which Robe Grillet is chiefly associated, relates to the novelist's concerns with things in themselves, not things as human symbols or metaphors. The second, which provided a title for Nathalie Sarraut's early novels, denotes the response of the human mind to the external stimuli, a response that is general and unmodified by the apparatus of character. So it is things, the furniture of the universe that are particular and variable. The multiplicity of human observes melts into an undifferentiable mode of response. So needless to say, there is nothing new in this epistemology as applied to the novel. So next we have cult or coterie novels. So the novel, unlike the poem, is a commercial commodity and it lends itself less than the materials of literary magazines to that specialized appeal called coterie, intellectual or elitist. It is fiction which has attracted a large following of loyal fans and supporters. So in addition to cult fiction, it is also possible to see cult authors who have attracted and held fans who eagerly await their new publications. So this genre varies widely in terms of um, subject and even quality, with the literary value of some works being called into question by book critics who have managed to resist the fan mentality. So in here are the examples of cult and coterie novels. It sometimes happens that books directed at highly cultivated audiences like Ulysses, Finnegans, and Knightwood, it achieves a wider response sometimes because of their daring in the exploitation of sex or obscenity, more often because of a vitality shared with more demotic fiction. So the duplicated typescript of this subsidized periodical, rather than the commercially produced book, is the communication medium for the truly hermetic novel. So the novel that achieves commercial publication but whose limited appeal precludes large financial success can frequently become the object of cult adulation. In the late period since World War II, especially in the United States, such cults can have large memberships. The cultists are usually students who, in an era of a mass education, form a sizable percentage of total population of United States. So it could also be fringes of youth sharing the student ethos, and the novels chosen for cult devotion relate to the social or philosophical needs of the readers. So next, we have detective, mystery, and thriller. The terms detective story, mystery, and thriller tend to be employed interchangeably. The detective story thrills the reader with mysterious crimes, usually of violent nature, and puzzles his reason until their motivation and their perpetrator are through some triumph of logic uncovered. So the detective story and mystery are in fact synonymous. But the thriller frequently purveys adventurous reasons without mysteries, like spy stories. Such such practitioners as Agatha Christie, Hilary Quinn, Earl Stanley Gardner, Raymond Chandler, to say nothing of the highly commercial Edgar Wallace and Mickey Spillane, have given much pleasure and offended only the most exalted literary canons. The fearless and intelligent amateur detective or private investigator or police officer has become a typical hero of the modern age. And those qualities that good mystery or thriller writing calls for are not to be despised, since they include economy, skillful sustention of suspense, and very artful plotting. So these are some examples of detective mystery and thriller novels. So these novels include crime fiction and mystery fiction in which an investigator or a detective, either professional, amateur, or retired, investigates a crime, often murder. So profanity, sex, and violence are also downplayed or treated humorously. So next we have Western. So man's concern with taming wild land or advancing frontiers or finding therapy in reversion from the civilized life to the atavistic is well reflected in adventure novels, beginning with James Fenimore Cooper's novels of the American frontier, The Pioneers in 1823 and The Last of the Mohicans in 1826. So as the 19th century advanced and new tracts of America were opened up, a large body of fiction came out of men who were involved in pioneering adventure. So Westerns are defined by their genre, specific characters, and settings. The essential elements of a Western are cowboys, Native Americans, the lawlessness of the region and era, and Western settlers or pioneers. The Western is now thought of predominantly as a cinematic form, but it arose out of literature. So other frontier fiction has come from another new world, the antipodes. South Africa as well has come from another new world, as well as the Australian outback. But the American West has provided the best mythology, and it is still capable of literary treatment. So sophisticated literary devices may be grafted onto the Western, surrealistic fantasy or parallels to Shakespeare or to the ancient classes, but the peculiar and perennial appeal of the Western lies in its ethical simplicity, the frequent violence, the desperate attempt to maintain minimal civilized order, as well as the stark, near epic figures from true Western history. Shown in the slide are examples of Western novels that are primarily set in the American Old West between the late 18th century and late 19th century and tells the story of cowboys, settlers, and outlaws exploring the Western frontier and taming the Wild West. So the characters, the settings, and themes of Western novels are highly specific and belong exclusively to the Western genre. So next, we have the fantasy and excuse me, prophecy. The term science fiction is a loose one, and it is often made to include fantastic and prophetic books that make no reference to the potentialities of science and technology for changing human life. So fantasy prepares the reader for prophecy. Both fantasy and prophecy are a matter of tone of voice. They are the products of the author's attitude towards his materials, his reader, and himself. So they are not aspects of a novel equivalent to a character or plot, but rather elements that overlie these aspects, ways of understanding a novel conceptually. So nevertheless, a novel like Kit Roberts' Pavane in 1969, which has as a premise the conquest of England by Spain in 1588 and the consequent suppression rather than development of free Protestant intellectual inquiry, is called science fiction, though such term as fiction of hypothesis and time fantasy would be more fitting. So the imaginative novelist is entitled to remake the existing world or present possible future worlds, and a large corpus of fiction devoted to such speculative visions has been produced in the last 100 years. More of it is based on metaphysical hypotheses than on scientific marvels. So Jules Verne and H.G. Wells pioneered what may be properly termed science fiction, mainly to an end of diversion. So, since the days of Wells' Time Machine in 1895 and Invisible Man in 1897, the fiction of hypothesis has frequently had a strong didactic aim, highly concerned with the opposing very utopianism that Wells, mainly in his non-fictional works, built on the potentialities of socialism and technology. Next, we have the proletarian. The novel that the novel, like Dickens' Hard Times in 1854, presents the lives of working men or other members of the lower orders, is not necessarily an example of proletarian fiction. The category properly springs out of direct experience of proletarian life and is not available to writers whose background is bourgeoisie or aristocratic. So consequently, William Goldwyn's Caleb Williams in 1794 and Robert Page Hermsprong in 1796, although like Hard Times, sympathetic to the lot of the oppressed worker, are more concerned with the imposition of reform from above than with the revolution from within, and proletarian novel is essentially an intended device of revolution. The Russian Maxim Gorky, with works such as Foma Gordiev in 1900s and Mother in 1907, as well as numerous short stories portraying the bitterness of poverty and unemployment. In fact, the pseudonym Gorky means bitter. May be taken as an exemplary proletarian writer. The United States has produced a rich crop of working class fiction. Such socialist writers as Jack London, Upton Sinclair, John Dos Passos, and Edward Dubbard, however, did not witness the triumph of the workers' revolution in their own country. The socialist writers that I have mentioned a while ago did not witness the triumph of the workers' revolution in their own country, unlike Gorky. Kay naka-witness daw siya. And it is the fate of the American proletarian novelist through literary success either to join the class he once dreamed of overthrowing or to become anarchic and frustrated. So in the Soviet Union, the proletarian novel was doomed to disappear in the form of Gorky knew, for it is the essence of the revolutionary novel to possess vitality and validity only when written under capitalist tyranny. So next, we have Pride and Prejudice.
Okay, to continue the report about Pride and Prejudice, it is written by Jane Austen. So, Pride and Prejudice is a before we tackle about the main story, let me introduce to you first the person behind the said novel. So Jane Austen, she was an English novelist known primarily for her 6 major novels, which interpret, critique, and comment upon the British landed gentry at the end of the 18th century. So Austen's plots often explore the dependence of women on marriage in the pursuit of favorable social standing and economic security. So in this novel, we will examine how the dependence of women on marriage in the pursuit of favorable social standing and economic security. So in the first part of the novel, it is stated, or there's a line stating, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So in this part, if a single man is in possession of good fortune or is a rich man, he must have a wife or a partner in life. So as we go along with the story, we will understand what really is the meaning of this sentence or phrase. So Pride and Prejudice, it is a romantic novel by Jane Austen, published anonymously in 3 volumes in 1813. So a classic of English literature written with incisive wit and superb character delineation. It centers on the burgeoning relationship between Elizabeth Bennet, the daughter of a country gentleman, and Fitzwilliam Darcy, a rich aristocratic landowner. So in this part, makita na nato or masabtan na nato ang relationship, pero not wholly naagod sila kuan relationship between Elizabeth and Fitzwilliam Darcy, which is Mr. Darcy, he is rich, and Elizabeth, siya ang silbi woman in not dependent kay usa siya ka character nga nag-portray sa iyahang pride. So here we will tackle so upon the publication of Pride and Prejudice, naka-receive ni nga novel of a lot of critics and from readers. So the first edition was sold out within the first year and it went out of print. So makuan gud nato nga ang pag-publish ani nga novel, it is very famous kay bisan ang kuan pag-publish pa is nahurot na daan ang ilahang copy. So though Pride is technically one of the 7 deadly sins. So the 7 deadly sins, first is lust, the second first lust, wrath, sloth, gluttony, and pride, and greed. So we have also so muto siya ang the 7 deadly sins. Ang pangkapito is the pride. So nowadays we often tend to interpret it with much more positive spin because we are here in the 20th century. So we encourage pride in ourselves, our friends, our kids, our colleagues, etc. In fact, you could make the argument that prejudice is more worthy of deadly sin status than pride. So if you're reading Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, or if you are watching if you have watched the Pride and Prejudice movie, in the modern day definitions of those titular words in mind, you might miss some of the takeaways. So maka-remember ko sa una ni Ma'am Chloe saying nga kuan you should watch the Pride and Prejudice movie ingana nya makahuna-huna pud ta nga usa ka ang naa ana nga novel nganong sige og mention si Ma'am about ana. So we have here the characters. So first one, so we have Elizabeth Bennet. So Elizabeth Bennet is the novel's protagonist. So she is the second daughter of Mr. Bennet. So Elizabeth, also known as Lizzie, is the most intelligent and sensible of the five Bennet sisters. So as I watched the movie, makaingon ko nga si Lizzie, murag siya mo'y favorite sa iyahang papa, who is Mr. Bennet. Now we have here Fitzwilliam So Elizabeth's pride is one of the reasons she's such an intriguing heroine and so often perceived as being ahead of her time. So in the early 19th century, when Austen wrote Pride and Prejudice, it was unheard of that a woman in Lizzie's position, namely, largely devoid of wealth or status, so would dare to have such headstrong opinions about whom she would marry, let alone make those thoughts unknown. So si Lizzie makaingon siya nga marriage is kuan hanang not about having her partner the luxury of money. So makaingon gud ta nga si Lizzie namulong siya og way to find marriage for love. So Lizzie was not, however, above prejudice, but unlike how we customarily view prejudice as having a preconceived and negative notion about a thing or group, Austen often illustrates her characters as having prejudice for individual people, though not necessarily in a negative way. So for example, Elizabeth automatically trusts the easygoing and handsome George Wickham, essentially because he's easygoing and handsome. So, ug makita dai kag easygoing and handsome nga tawo diri sa ato like mo trust di ay dayon ka ingana. So, similarly, Mr. Collins believed wholly in Lady Catherine de Bourgh's opinions simply because of her socio-economic status, regardless of whether she is deserving of his respect. So, of course, there's plenty of prejudice against people too, but it primarily relates to the prejudice you feel against someone who makes a bad first impression. So, fittingly, Austen originally planned to name the novel First Impression. Mr. Darcy's bad first impression stars the Bennets on him immediately. Kay ang kuan manggod characteristic manggod ni Mr. Darcy kay he is a wealthy gentleman. He is the master of Pemberley and the nephew of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Though Darcy is intelligent and honest, his excess of pride causes him to look down on his social inferiors. So Mr. Darcy is kuan anang very rich good siya, like na sila mansion ingana, and kuan kanang Mr. Darcy's bad first impression stars the Bennets on him. Kay si Mr. Darcy magod like kabantay mo nang sa mga Wattpad nga kuan hilumon nga the bad boy type, like kanang mo snub ingana snub ba nang dili mo tagad maghilom ra sa kilid nang ingana ba og imuhang istoryahon mga words, pila ra ka words or sentences ang mga istorya. So ingana si Mr. Darcy. So and the reversal of the prejudice becomes one of the main conflicts throughout the novel, especially for stubborn Elizabeth. If you read or watch the Pride and Prejudice, one of its many adaptations. So you know how difficult it is for her to admit she misjudged Darcy's character through her first impression. So we have here Jane Bennet. So the eldest and the most beautiful Bennet sister. Jane is more reserved and gentler than Elizabeth. The easy pleasantness with which she and Bingley interact contrasts starkly with the mutual distaste and marks the encounters between Elizabeth and Darcy. So the next one is Charles Bingley. So Darcy is considered considerably wealthy best friend. So si Charles Bingley, siya ang partner ni Jane Bennet. So Bingley's purchase of Netherfield, an estate near the Bennet, serves as the impetus for the novel. Excuse me. So he is a genial, well-intentioned gentleman whose easygoing nature contrasts with Darcy's initially discourteous demeanor. He is blissfully uncaring about class differences. So unlike Mr. Darcy, si Charles Bingley, siya mo'y kuan hanang easygoing, like pwede rin nimong ma-interact despite your social differences. Now we have here Mr. Bennet. So the patriarch of the Bennet family, a gentleman of modest income with 5 unmarried daughters. So Mr. Bennet has a sarcastic, cynical sense of humor that he uses to purposefully irritate his wife. Though he loves his daughters, Elizabeth in particular, so makaingon ko kung anadyo siya favoritism, he often fails as a parent, preferring to withdraw from the never-ending marriage concerns of the women around him rather than offer help. So we have the next one, Mrs. Bennet. So Mr. Bennet's wife, a foolish, noisy woman whose only goal in life is to see her daughters married. Because of her low breeding and often unbecoming behavior, Mrs. Bennet often repels the very suitors whom she tries to attract for her daughters. So makaingon ko nga si Mrs. Bennet, murag iyahang gibugaw iyahang mga anak, like not literally bugaw, pero something like that nga soft term ra kay kuan man hanang bisan dili ganahan si, for example, Elizabeth na makasal, iyang gipursue, like for iyahang gipugos na moingon na lamang siya nga dili kuan hanang like musuki siya og dili siya musugot nga ikasal anang tawhana ingana. So makaingon ko nga napoy pag not selfish selfish siya, but not selfish in a way nga ganahan ra siya makakita og kuan partner iyahang mga anak in for their future. Now we have here George Wickham, a handsome fortune-hunting militia officer. So Wickham's good looks and charm attract Elizabeth initially, but Darcy's revelation about Wickham's disreputable past clues her in his true nature and simultaneously draws her closer to Darcy. So kanis George Wickham, silbi mo ni siya kuan hanang murag usa sa paris-paris ni Elizabeth or ni Lizzie. Like kuan na makaingon ka nga hala kuan may pag sila nala may magkadayon, but then due to Darcy's revelation, because George Wickham Manggod is kuan hanang part of Darcy's childhood ing ana, so kabalo siya og unsa ang batasan ni George Wickham. Now for Lydia Bennet, the youngest Bennet sister, she is gossipy, immature, and self-involved. Unlike Elizabeth, Lydia flings herself headlong into romance and ends up running off with Wickham. So kuan kani siya maong nakasal si Lydia Bennet ni Wickham kay tungod pod ni Darcy. Like for example, tungod ni Darcy, like naay part si Darcy anang pagpakasal ni Lydia Bennet kay si Lydia ganahan siya makasal. Dayon naay plot twist ani nga story or movie kay kuan hanang naa di ay dako di ay part si Darcy sa ilang love story ni Lydia kay iyang giingnan si Wickham nga i-pursue si Kuan, Lydia ing ana, and si Darcy pud ang nigasto sa ilahang kasal ni Wickham. So we have here the plot. Pride and Prejudice follows the turbulent relationship between Elizabeth Bennet, the daughter of a country gentleman, and Fitzwilliam Darcy, a rich aristocratic landowner. So they must overcome the titular sins of pride and prejudice in order to fall in love and marry. So romance seems so urgent and delightful in Austen because marriage is a business. So muna ni siya, diri na siya nato makuan hanang ma-associate nga need diri nga panahon na need ang marriage para para ma-save, like for example ma-save ang inyong family or ma-save ka as a woman kay magdepend ka sa imuhang mabana. Dayon, and her characters cannot help treating it as a pleasure. Pride and Prejudice is the best of her novels because its romance involves two people who were born to be in love and care not about business, pleasure, or each other. It is frustrating enough when one person refuses to fall in love, but when both refuse, we cannot rest until they kiss. So the last part ani is murag ko like makayo ko ga gikilig ko dagan silang problema nga giatubang, but then ilahang pride, ilahang gipakuan nya sila ra di ay magkadayon ingana ba nga ngano pong inyo gipadugay ingana, so magkadayon ra di ay mo. So kani siya nga part nga sa last part of the movie is nagkahalo si Lizzie and Darcy. So Sylvie mo na to siya kuan sa ilahang love story, Sylvie ending. So when Jane Austen wrote about pride, she wasn't talking about someone taking deep pleasure in their talents, specific accomplishments, or intrinsic sense of self-worth. Instead, it was much more about comparing yourself to others. In other words, we think of pride in terms of being proud of something or someone. So kani manggod siya nga nang it was such more about comparing yourself to others. Like for example, si Lizzie is that kuan hanang wala sila like ang ilahang status in life is very far, like si Mr. Darcy labag kadato, gwapo ingana mo, gwapa man pud sila ang Bennet family, but then kuan hanang ilang economic social status is kuan mas maba sa ilahang Mr. Darcy. So Pride and Prejudice is one of the most famous work of English literature, written and published during the Regency period of British literature. So what is Regency period of British literature? So the Regency period in literature is a broader period of time and dates between 1790 and 1830, beginning just after the French Revolution. So while many of the romantic poets were active at this time, this era is probably most remembered for the domestic novels that we all know and love. So what are the main characteristics of the Regency period? We have here, so the key features of Regency literature are witty conversation, like for example, ang mga kuan manggod, ang mga story, ang mga lines manggod, or yes, ang mga lines sa mga characters kay there are some lines nga makaingon ta usa puy pasabot ani. So there are kuan hanang communication, they communicate in a sense that naay times nga we as audience or watchers cannot interpret if we don't watch the movie. So a focus on marriage. yes, this novel or this movie focuses on marriage, like kanang like for example kanang i-insist sa for example insist ni Mrs. Bennet ang iyang mga anak nga ipakasal anang tawhana inganang tawhana para ma-save ang iyahang mga anak. So and attention to fashion and manners. So in this in this movie or in this time of time of time of the year na ma-associate gud nato ang ilahang pagka well-mannered and how they behave in that period, because like how they dress, how they should sit na dito nga you should not sit with your wife ingana you should in a table na dito tong in a table you should not sit with your wife. So na ay mga manners nga unusual para nato in our time, but it is respected during their time. So if you enjoy the Regency style in prose fiction, there's a subgenre of romance novel set in this period featuring characteristics found in the work of Austen, Shelley, and Scott. So the novel features Elizabeth as an unusual dynamic female lead for the Victorian time period. So we have to focus our senses in this slide or screen, what's written on the screen. So the novel features Elizabeth as an unusual dynamic female lead for the Victorian time period. She searches to find meaning in herself amidst proud and false people, learning about the superficiality of manners, economic class inequalities, and how to experience love as something outside of the social expectations placed upon her to marry a man with more wealth than her families. So, nakatatak na gud sa ilaha nga you have to marry a man nga rich para masalbar ka. So you have na-set na ang standard nga ing ana, but Elizabeth or Lizzie nagpakiluoy siya sa iyang papa nga na moto nga nagpakiluoy siya sa iyang papa, then anang mayon siya nga love niya ng tawhana mo nang dapat siya nga tawhana mo iyang pakasalan, and ni agree iyang papa. So Pride and Prejudice was written before the Victorian period during King George IV regency period. So we all know about regency period naman. So the novel was widely influential because it was able to portray everyday events in a realistic way. So kani siya bisan pagkaron na ay naara Japon ni nga kuan ng marriage thingy ing ana nga naadya po nag-set og standards nga muna mo ang dapat imong mapangasawa puhon ing ana dapat dato dapat gwapo ing ana. So naara Japon ni nga standards. So muna siyang naka-portray na siya sa ato ang everyday events kay sa 'di ba sa diri nga story man pod, like for example Mrs. Bennet siya ang bisan patriarchal way ang Victorian period na apoy kuan hanang gisunod ang like napod sila ang part sa mama is murag maupoy gisunod, but then ang mama is agad rapod sa ni Mr. Bennet. So rather than coming off as mundane, became interesting and colorful stories that resulted in an extremely popular novel. Since the plot occurs chronologically, readers experience the events of the story alongside with the characters, which allows them to feel close to and bonded with the characters. So furthermore, the subversive presentation of concepts like gender, wealth and status, and frivolous societal expectations gave the novel its timeless appeal that continues to impress the new readers to this day. So together, each character's pride prejudice, or both, and their struggle to overcome that drives the entire plot of Pride and Prejudice. If Austen had written the novel today, she might have entitled it Being Arrogant and Jumping to Conclusions instead. So being arrogant, mo ni si Mr. Darcy, and jumping to conclusions, mo ni si Lizzie. Kay kuan man na nag-overthink as a girl, mag-overthink kung unsa na siya nga tawhana, ingana. So Dara Pride and Prejudice is the best of her novels because its romance involves two people who were born to fall in love and care not about business, pleasure, or each other. It is frustrating enough when one person refuses to fall in love, but when they both refuse, we cannot rest until they kiss. So that's all for Pride and Prejudice, everyone. I hope you have learned something about this story, about how it relates to the Victorian period, how women are in Victorian period, and how important it is in this era and in this time. So we have here The Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which will be reported by Miss Dolly Jomento.
Hello again. Now, I will discuss to you a novel written by William Golding entitled Lord of the Flies. So, in here, you can see the author's background. William Golding was losing his faith in humanity. Serving aboard a British destroyer in World War II, the philosophy teacher turned royal family lieutenant was constantly confronted by the atrocities of his fellow man. And when he returned to England to find Cold War superpowers threatening one another with nuclear annihilation, he was forced to interrogate the very roots of human nature. These musings on the inevitability of violence would inspire his first and most famous novel, Lord of the Flies. So Lord of the Flies refers to Beelzebub, a demon associated with pride and war, two themes very much at the heart of Golding's book. So he is also called the Lord of Filth and Dung. Throughout the novel, the children grow dirtier and dirtier, an outward reflection of their inner state. As their savagery and evil increases, they seek a symbol of God to worship. So the next bullet, a modern classic book and an allegorical novel and dystopian fiction. So Lord of the Flies is a modern classic book, an allegorical novel that employs realistic situation of a group of boys stranded on a desert island to embody abstract ideas about human beings, inherent savagery, and the dangers of mob mentality and totalitarian leadership. Objects on the island serves as allegorical functions, as most significantly the conch represents communication and the democratic process. Allegorical fiction as a genre asks readers to the questions, the concepts governing human interaction, and explores the way larger forces impact individual lives. So the novel is an allegory, which is a story in which characters, settings, and events stand for things larger than themselves. For example, the island represents the world. Ralph and Jack, the two main characters in the story, symbolize different approaches to leadership. Because Lord of the Flies presents the characters as living in nightmarish, oppressive society as a result of to their inherently flawed natures, it is also an example of dystopian fiction. In direct contrast to utopian fiction, which posits that human beings are perfectible and a society free of suffering is possible. Dystopian fiction asserts that societal injustice is inevitable. William Golding wrote Lord of the Flies following World War II, during which the Nazis exterminated 6 million Jews and the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. In this context, the novel's profound pessimism is understandable. William Golding intended this novel as a tragic parody of children's adventure tales, illustrating humankind's intrinsic evil nature. He presents the reader with a chronology of events, leading a group of young boys from a hope to disaster as they attempt to survive their uncivilized, unsupervised, isolated environment until rescued. After being rejected by 21 publishers, the novel was finally published in 1954 by Faber and Faber. Golding addressed why he didn't include girls in the story by saying that one, he was more familiar with the childhood experiences and nature of boys, both by being one and by teaching them. And two, that if you land with a group of little boys, they are more like a scaled down version of society than a group of little girls would be, on the grounds that women are far superior to men. He also didn't want the group to be boys and girls because he didn't want to address the idea of sex in the novel. Obviously, this kind of thinking on the side of reductive, an all-girls cast doesn't automatically make for a conflict-free story by any means, but it's true that gender plays an integral role in how the boys of the Lord of the Flies adapt to their surroundings, and a gender swap version would have to take that into consideration. So the novel was a bleak satire of a classic island adventure story, a popular genre where young boys get shipwrecked in exotic locations. So the protagonists are able to master nature while evading the dangers posed by their environments. So the genre also endorsed the problematic colonialist narrative found in many British works at the time, in which the boys teach the island's native inhabitants their allegedly superior British values. So Golding's satire even goes far as to explicitly use the setting and character names from R.M. Ballantyne's Coral Island, one of the most beloved island novels. But while Ballantyne's promised reader pleasure, profit, and unbounded amusement, Golding's had darker things in store. So even though the novel experienced being banned from schools, banned from writers and other places before, it continues to be adapted and referenced by other writers and institutions up to this day. Lord of the Flies established William as a major literary voice. It continues to be adapted and referenced um, by other people, or even famous people who adore this novel by Williams. The reason why nga nung dili mo kuan ang mga uban nga teachers ani sa school sa una, kay naa siya bullying, naa siya violence, and naay posibilidad nga ma-influence ang mga mind sa mga students nga mubuhat sa mga butang nga naa ani nga novel. So his writing frequently raised questions about morality and human nature, of which he had a decidedly cynical view. The themes under this novel is civilization versus savagery. So the central concern of Lord of the Flies is the conflict between two competing impulses that exist within all human beings: the instinct to live by rules, act peacefully, follow moral commands, and value the good of the group, against instinct to gratify one's immediate desires, act violently to obtain supremacy over others, and enforce one's will. Next is loss of innocence. As the boys on the island progress from well-behaved, orderly children longing for rescue to cruel, bloodthirsty hunters who have no desire to return to civilization, they naturally lose the sense of innocence that they possess at the beginning of the novel. So, makaingon ta din nga, at the end of the novel, nagpangita pa sila sa mga adults nga ganahan nga pwedeng maka-rescue nila kay gikuyaw since bata pa sila gikuyawan sila sa posibleng mahitabo nila kay wala pud sila alimuwag sa mga like sa mga lugar-lugar nga unfamiliar nila. However, as time goes by nga murag naanad na sila sa place sa island, murag ibaliwala na lang nila nga napa bay maka-rescue nila or wala na kay naanad naman pud sila nga to be independent, to survive on their own. So next ani nga theme is struggle to build civilization. The struggle to build civilization forms the main conflict of the Lord of the Flies. Ralph and Piggy believe that structure, rules, and maintaining a signal fire are the greatest priorities, while Jack believes hunting, violence, and fun should be prioritized over safety, protection, and planning for the future. So as you can see here, naagod sila conflict, naagoy ganahan nga mo rule pod, mas mo pataas pod sa kanang galid nila karon, nga galid nila nga leader. Next is the man's inherent evil. So the fact that the main characters in The Lord of the Flies are young boys suggests the potential for evil is inherent even in small children. Jack, for example, is initially keen for rules and civility, but becomes obsessed with hunting, frightened and empowered by the promise of violence. Jack's desire to control and subjugate proves more powerful than his desire for empathy, intellect, and civilization, and Jack becomes a brutal and leader. So, makabantay tano, bisan guday unsa kabutan ang tawo, bisag unsa ka inosente ang tawo, naguday na siya gitago nga kulo sa sulod. Kay even the children in this kuan naamang gani sila mas ikabuga pa nga worst na pwede magani nila dayang mahimo ang mga unexpected nga butang nga wala nato huna-huna nga makaya nilang himuon. So munang nakaingon si Golding nga ang iyahang kuan ani is mohimo siya ani nga novel kay para ipakita sa tanan or i-portray sa tanan nga kitang mga tawo naagud tay mga hidden nga pagka-devil sa ato ang kaugalingon. Naagud tay bad side. Bisag unsa ka maayo nato nga tawo. Di ba kay mapuno man pud ta usahay, maglagot man pud ta usahay. So in that factor pwede nato nga mahimo ang or mapagawas ang ato ang inherent evil. So next is dangers of mob mentality. So Lord of the Flies explores the dangers of mob mentality in terrifying scenes of violence and torture. Early on, the boys sing, "Kill the pig! Kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood." After a successful hunt, elevating their shared act of violence into a celebratory chant. By coming together as a mob, the boys transform the upsetting experience of killing an animal in a bonding ritual. Acting as one group, the boys are able to commit worse and worse crimes, deluding one another into believing in the potential danger posed by the beast justifies their violence. So in here nagkawala na gud ang tribe nga gilid ni Jack is mas nagka-worse na gud ang ilahang mas ni worsen na gud ang ilahang way of kuan hanang living or way of surviving kay bisan og anang mupatay na sila og like mga baboy anang dili na sila mahadlok, dili na sila makuyawan sa pwedeng mahitabo or unsay pwedeng mahitabo nila in the jungle or in the forest. Murag kumpiyansa na sila sa ilang kaugalingon ba nga they are strong, they are powerful mo nang wala na sila kahadlok. So next is war and the future and the future of mankind. So set during a global war, Lord of the Flies offers a view of what society might look like trying to rebuild after a large-scale man-made catastrophe. In their attempt to rebuild society, the boys cannot agree on a new order and eventually fall into savagery. Ralph comes to realize that social order, fairness, and thoughtfulness have little value in a world where basic survival a struggle such as after a devastating war. So dinhi na-realize di ay ni Ralph nga ang mga tao di ay like samtang magkadugay or mas or naa sila sa lisod nga sitwasyon, mas magka-worse pud ang kuan ba ang ilahang ka maldito or ang ilahang pwede nga mahimo nga dili maayo. So we will proceed to the symbolisms. So first is the conch shell. Ralph and Piggy discovered the conch shell on the beach at the start of the novel and use it to summon the boys together after the crash separates them. Used in this capacity, the conch shell becomes a powerful symbol of civilization and order in the novel. The shell effectively governs the boys' meetings, for the boy who holds the shell holds the right to speak. So si Piggy ang nakakita ani sa dagat. Dayon, na-curious si Ralph ug unsang iyang nakit-an. Then mo tong ningon si Piggy nga naiingani akong lula sa una if naani siya bangag dinhi. So posible nga mutingog ni siya. So ilang gitrayan napatingog ni Ralph ang conch. Muto nga nakadungog ang uban nga mga bata nga wala pa nila nakiti ug ni tapok dayon sila pagkadungog sa conch nga tingog. So muuto nga sukad ato murag muupod to siya usas way nga nahimong leader si Ralph na ay pagkahiusa ug ang mga bata na ay respeto sa usag-usa at first in the first part of the novel kay ila pa man gi-consider nga ang conch kuno ug dili ikaw ang gakayot sa conch dapat maghilom ra ka. You can raise your hand and say, can I speak? Then usa ihatag ang conch, then you will have the privilege to speak. So murag ang ilahang kuan is ang conch serves as your kuan ba right to communicate or to say something sa grupo. Next is Piggy's glasses. So Piggy is the most intelligent, rational boy in the group, and his glasses represent the power of science and intellectual endeavor in society. This symbolic significance is clear from the start of the novel when the boys use the lenses from Piggy's glasses to focus the sunlight and start a fire. When Jack's hunters raid Ralph's camp and steal the glasses, the savages effectively take the power to make fire, leaving Ralph's group helpless. The signal fire thus functions as a kind of measurement of the strength of the civilized instinct remaining on the island. Ironically, at the end of the novel, a fire finally summons a ship to the island, but not the signal fire. So si Piggy magud is kay dili siya makakita if wala siya eyeglass. So munang nagud siya gisuot-suot nga eyeglass. So unable to make a fire, it's either magkuan ka og duwa ka wood nga imong kuskuson, di ba? Katong traditional ra gud nga paggama og fire. However, dili man sila makabalo nga mo pa kuan ato, mo pa siga. So naka-realize si Ralph nga naa may eyeglass si Piggy, why not iyahang gamiton to para murag i-direct sa sun ang iyahang light ba dayon nagkahinay-hinay na og signal ng fire. So next nga symbolism is the signal fire. The signal fire burns on the mountain and later on the beach to attract the notice of passing ships that might be able to rescue the boys. So kani siya motong ang purpose nga naghimo sila og fire is para naguni sila sa taas sa mountain ani naggama og fire kay para if naay moagi nga ship or kanang helicopter kay nabe uban pa nga part nga naapay naggira. So basin og maagian sila makabantay kay naay ang fire mo na ga-serve nila as signal or gapaila nga naay tawo pa didto nga island nga need nga i-rescue. So next is the beast. The imaginary beast that frightens all the boys stands for the primal instinct of savagery that exists within all human beings. The boys are afraid of the beast, but only Simon reaches the realization that they fear the beast because it exists within each of them. As the boys grow more savage, their belief in the beast grows stronger. By the end of the novel, the boys are ang mga boys ani are living it sacrifices and treating it as a totemic god. The boy's behavior is what brings the beast into existence. So the more savagely the boys act, the more real the beast seems to become. So si Simon, like mura siya spiritual ang kuan ni Simon ba, wala siya nito ugod nga na ay beast mo nang he is eager to find out if naabagyod. Muto nga pag adto niya sa cave nga ilang gibilieve nga naa ang beast, nakabalo siya nga mao di ay to ang lucky nga adult, nay usa ka adult nga mura siya og nahulog sa parachute ba. Then gabi na siya nakagawas dito sa cave kay naaman sa sulod sa cave ang lucky. Kay nahadlok man siya og unsa poy buhaton sa mga bata niya munang nitago siya dito sa cave. So pagsulod dito ni Simon niya gidala og bangkaw si Simon ba kay basin niya og naalagi kunoy beast na siya sagang nya kay nakuyawan man siya kay nakaitan man siya sa tiil atong tawo. So pagkayot niya nakuyawan siya, nadugsak niya ang tawo, then usa siya nidalagan sa dili di ay si Simon ang nakakita sa tawo, naay lain nga member ni Jack. Dayon si Simon mura to siya eager nga niadto sa cave. Then pag adto niya namatay na ang Lucky. Munang nidalagan siya sa gawas kay iya untang pabalon na ang mga tawo, ang iyang mga kauban nga tawo di ay to siya, dili di ay beast. So dito na unta nga exciting part, mabal-an tong ang kamatuoran nga walay beast para mabalik na pud ang mga bata nga mutuon ni Ralph. Kay nagkawala naman og members si Ralph tungod kay napunta na ni Jack. So during that time nga nidalagan si Simon para magpabalo sa iyang mga kauban nga tawo di ay to siya, na siya gigamit nga light nga unfamiliar pud ba, murag dala to siya atong kuan during ni crash ang ilahang plane. So gasige siya while gadalagan siya, sige siya gingana sa light nya pagkakita ni Jack ug ang membro miyembro niya abi dagway nila og maoy beast munang nidalagan sila paingon didto ni Simon og ilang napatay si Simon tungod kay abi nilag maoy beast nya wala sila kaklaro ilang idugsak-dugsak sa ilahang bangkaw so naanay namatay nga usa nila ka member sa bata. So next is the Lord of the Flies. So the Lord of the Flies is the bloody, severed sow's head that Jack impales on a stake in the forest glade as an offering to the beast. These complicated symbols becomes the most important image in the novel when Simon confronts the sow's head in the glade and it seems to speak to him, telling him that evil lies within every human heart and promising to have some fun with him. So mo ningon ko ninyo nga si Simon na murag naagud siya murag naa siya kakayahan ba nga makakuan og mga like mga spiritual things like kanang mga unusual ba nga murag naa siya kakayahan nga kanang murag makita ang future or kanang basta related siya sa mga spiritual nga aspects like kanang makita og mga dili ingon nato mo nang eager gud siya nga mo prove unta nga naa by beast or wala. So ang pasabot ani nga the Lord of the Flies is ang ulo sa baboy nga itom nga nadakpan nilang Jack. Ila tong giputol ang ulo ug ilang ilang ipatapot sa ilang bugsok then ilang ipatindog didto sa gawas sa cave nga pagtuon nila naa didto ang beast kay it serves as their offer kuno. Nya kay wala biyay beast, di ba? Munang naglibog na sila, munang muto siya nga mutoy pasabot ato nga mo ni siya nga title nga The Lord of the Flies. Kay tungod atong ulo nga ilang i-offer didto sa beast kunuhay, imaginative beast. So ang giingon dinhi nga nipakita kuno ni Simon nga or ni istorya kuno niya nga that evil lies within every human heart. So mutuo ba mo ani guys nga every human has an evil inside their unsa na their body or their soul. Kay ako mo agree good ko kay been there nakasulay na taanit mostly kita tanan or ang uban dagway wala pa basig padulong pa ba kay butan ra pod kaayo. So next nani is the last symbolism, Ralph, Piggy, Jack, Simon and Roger. So Lord of the Flies is an allegorical novel, di ba? And many of its characters signify important ideas or themes. For example, si Ralph represents order, leadership, and civilization. Si Piggy represents the scientific and intellectual aspects of civilization. Si Jack represents unbridled savagery and the desire for power. Si Simon represents natural human goodness. And Roger represents brutality and bloodlust at their most extreme. To the extent that the boys' society resembles a political state, the little ones might be seen as the common people, while the older boys represent the ruling classes and political leaders. So there are duwa ka koan murag anang gulang-gulang nila ba like si Ralph ug si Jack. Si Ralph mo ni siya demokrasya kunuhay. Ganahan siya og nay equal nga treatment, nay sundon nga rules kay para nay disiplina, para sibilisado ang ilahang pangamuyo sa island. Pero si Jack anang like kon iya ha, autocracy ha, ganahan siya nga siya'y mag-lead, ganahan siya og mga anang mga dili maayo nga pamaagi, ang ganahan siya nga mapunta niya ang trono sa pagka leader in a wrong way. So munang ang ipasabot din ni William nga ang mga bata kuno na sila serve as kanang ruling classes and political leaders kay si Ralph mo'y demokrasya, si Jack maoy autocracy. Then ang mga bata kuno didto nga silbi mo'y mopili og asa sila moadto mo kuno kita mga more ordinaryong tawo nga mubutar especially when pag-abot sa election. So next ani is Golding introduces the novel's major characters as well as its theme that evil as a destructive force in man, society, and civilization is present in us all. To illustrate this theme, Golding uses several major motifs: civilization versus savagery, humanity versus animality, technology versus nature, hunters versus gatherers, men versus women, adults versus children, and the intellect versus physicality. So as the characters interact with each other and with their environment, so do the forces they represent. Using the characters to embody these forces allows Golding the opportunity to compare and contrast with rich shadings of meaning rather than simplistic oppositions. Diba? Sa simple ra nga novel unta nga pagsabot kay mga bata ang gadala, dapat sayon ra pud nato siyang sabton. However, naagod siya mga anang major twist, naagod siya lami kayo nga mga conflict, daghan ka kayong realization. Munang I recommend you guys to read the story or to read the novel or bisan og mo watch na lang mo sa video or like kanang mura ra siya summarization sa video ba, and you will see it here in our PowerPoint ra or pwede ra pud mo search sa YouTube para mas masabtan ninyo ang story. So naa diri ang ato ang mga characters. So dili na nako ni sila binagsaon kay makita ra man po din ha. No need to explain naman po na. So next, we have the summary. So Lord of the Flies opens with the boys already on the island, but snippets of conversation hint at their terrifying journey. Their plane had been shut down in the midst of an unspecified nuclear war. The boys, ranging in age from 6 to 13, are strangers to each other, all except for a choir, clad in black uniforms, led by a boy named Jack. Just as in Valentine's Coral Island, the boys' new home appears to be paradise, with fresh water, shelter, and abundant food sources. But even from the novel's opening pages, a macabre darkness hangs over this seemingly tranquil situation. So the boys' shadows are compared to black, bat-like creatures, while the choir itself first appeared as something dark, fumbling along the beach. So within hours of their arrival sa island, the boys are already trading terrifying rumors of a vicious beast lurking in the woods. From these ominous beginnings, Golding's narrative reveals how quickly cooperation unravels without the presence of an adult authority. Kay niabot sila sa island, dayon patingog ni Ralph ang conch. Then nagbutaranay sila, then si Ralph ang nidaog. However, nagoy mga situations nga dili sila magkasinabot. Kay bata pa man pud sila, di ba? Kabantay pud ta sa atong mga bata din hikaron nga if pila ra gani kami minuto okay pa. Pero pagkataod-taod mag-away na pud. Especially if wala lagi mama or papa or walay adult nga makabuyag. So initially, the survivors tried to establish some sense of order. A boy named Ralph blows into a conch shell to assemble the group and delegate tasks. So ni assign siya mga task like sila kuno mo gama og fire. Dayon katong mga choir mao'y muhunt og mga pagkaon or unsay pwede nilang makaon. Then naay magbantay sa fire dito sa mountain para ma-maintain ra pud nila ang siga ato kay wa man pud sila kabalog unsa oras naay posibleng moagi para na magkuan ra gyapon ang fire magsiga. So but as Jack vies for leadership with Ralph, the group splinters and the boys submit to their dark urges. The mob of children soon forgets their plan for rescue, silences the few voices of reason, and blindly follows Jack to the edge of the island and the edge of sanity. Kay for Ralph, si Ralph manggod ni ana siya nga naara sa atong huna-huna ang beast. If dili mo motuo, dili ra ta mahadlok. Kay dili man pud mo motuo. However, niingon man si Jack nga ang ka Jack nga opinion man pud is if naay beast atong patyon. Kay para safety ta dinhi. So ang mga bata nipunta sila didto ni Jack. Kay ganahan man pud sila nga mapatay pud ang beast kay para dili mapiligro ang ilahang pag-stay dito samtang gahulat sila nga ma-rescue. Then moto nga nagkahinay-hinay na og kawalan si Ralph og mga members. And ang member ra nga nagpabilin gud nga tinuod ni Ralph is si Piggy. Si Piggy lang good ang nagpabilin ni Ralph nga tinuod nga member. Kay naay panahon nga ang uban mobalhin ni Jack, napay uban nga mobalik na pud ni Ralph. Munang malibog lagi sila. So in here you can see that Jack weaponizes fear and masculine aggression to divide the group, forming a society that rewards strong and subjugates the weak. The fledgling democracy is all but destroyed by the end of the novel. Jack, having seized power like authoritarians from history such as Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini, the novel ends with Piggy and Simon, Ralph's remaining loyal friends, dead, and Ralph being hunted by Jack and his tribe. Ralph and the remaining boys are rescued on the beach by soldiers, and Ralph is left to grieve the horror he lived through on the island. So, the end of the story, namatay gud si Piggy and si Simon. Naapagani to si Roger. Kay si Jack, si Jack manggod ba, more on, anang ganahan siya nga magbinuang, mubuli, murag, even killing, murag kalataw-an ra na niya ba, murag malipay pa siya, nga na ay mamatay. Una nga namatay si Roger kay, naghimo sila sa ilahang chant ba sa tribe nila, kay nakadakop to sila og baboy. Kay pagkuaningon man siya kalit nga Roger kuno moy ilahang target nga kuanon hantingon. Then si Roger nagdalagan-dalagan sa sulod within the circle of their kuan hanang sa dancing sa gasayaw nila nga tribe. Nya kay anang makaingon ka nga okay ra dagway ni mura ra dagway sila ga perform ba nga kanang naiidakop na ikuan. However, nagkadugay sila nga nag-perform ana nga chant, ila namang isigig duot si Roger, isigi naman nila og dugsak sa ilaha nga bugsay. Munang namatay pud si Roger dinhi sa novel. So next is the novel ends with naval officers arriving on the island. Moto nga point nga si Ralph na gud lamang ang nabilin kay namatay naman si Piggy, si Simon, si Roger nga ang uban nga membro namalhi naman ni Jack. So si Ralph na lang ang nabilin. So gihunting siya, isugo ni Jack ang iyang mga kauban nga ilang i-hunt si Ralph. Kay ila pong patyon. So at the end of the novel, naay mga naval officers nga ni arrive sa island. The one that spies Ralph and the savages who chase him. Anang savages mo mga membro ong Jack. At first, he sees the boys as dirty children involved in fun and games. So when he learns from Ralph what has happened on the island, he is amazed that civilized British children could sink to such a low level of humanity. So, makaingon ka ba nga, nakabalo na siya sa tanan-tanan, although ma-amaze ka, but nganong wala man kay kuan ba nganong ang ilang panglantaw is for fun ra to nga dula-dula nga gadala na og mga deadly weapons tong mga bata katong mga savages. So Ralph and the boys listening to his scolding and break into tears that quickly become sobs. So pag-abot sa naval officers, maugod to siya nakasave ni Ralph. Kay na silbi na kuan siya ba, natakil po siya ba, madakpa na unta siya sa grupo ni Jack. Dayon, paglingi niya sa taas, naa siya nakitaan nga laki, muto siya nakapahunong sa pagdakop ni Jack ni Ralph. So they are crying over the horror of their experience and relief over returning to civilization. As the boys weep, the naval officer simply looks out to sea to allow them to regain their composure. The ending is abrupt, appearing almost contrived. So makaingon ta sa nga grabe kayo ang ilahang nga giagian nya mga bata pa kayo sila like 16 to 13. Who would have thought nga ingana gud lisod ilahang makuanan nga they become independent nga wala na sila gasalig if anang i-rescue pa sila nga kaya na nilang mabuhi nga sila ra, kaya na nilang mupatay sa ilahang kauban nga anang nakauban naman po murag na naman untay pinagsamahan ba pero naagud yapoy mo traidor. So para nako ha, the naval officers fails to see the significance of the boy's experience kay he did not realize what has happened on the island. Nga pwede man na niyang ma-mirror in his own inability to recognize evil within himself and all mankind. So when he mentions fun and games, the reader is jerked back to reality. So these are children who should be innocent and should be playing games. Instead, they have become the reality in all of us. Not that of innocence, but of evil. Kaya ang bata, dapat ilang i-enjoy ang ilang kinabuhi. But sa nahitabo nila sa island, murag mas ni worse sila. And which portrays our inner self or anang hidden identity nga naapod tay pagka-evil. So it is ironic that the naval officer, while appearing to represent civilization and rational society, actually represents the evil present in civilization, just like the boys themselves. He is a soldier who fights wars, which is certainly civilization at its worst. So siya ma-considered pud siya as evil also kay mupatay man pud siya og tawo kay na anang naval officer pud siya. So mapunta pud siya sa gira. So napud siya mga evil doings nga mabuhat. So these are some of the scenes from The Lord of the Flies. I highly recommend nga mulantaw mo sa movie, good guys. Or kanang mo read mo sa novel kay tsada gud siya kaayo and daghan mo kayong ma-learn. This is Piggy. This is Ralph. Then this is Jack. Then this is the scene nga naghimo sila sa ilahang anang chant sa ilahang tribu. Then this is one of the symbolisms nga katong sa signals of fire. Muni ilahang muni na sila ani sa mountain para magama og fire. Dayon mauni siya. Muni siya Lord of the Flies. Ang soul's head. Kay di ba ang karni if madugayan na gani kabantay mo nang nay magihaw og karni sa atoa. If madugayan na gani langawon o muna siya na di ba ningon nga ilang gi-offer sa beast. So as magkadugay nga magkalalom ilang pagtuan na mas magkakuan murag mas devoted pud sila kaayo ba the more nga ma-devoted pud sila. So kani siya nga guys nga soul's head or ulo sa baboy muna siya Lord of the Flies. You can see here nga naa pa siya mga langaw-langaw and this is Simon kani siya is mo ni siya ang grupo ni Jack ni Jack nga manghunt og pagkaon or mga baboy. So next, these are the famous lines and quotes from the Lord of the Flies. So maybe there is a beast. Maybe it's only us. The world that understandable and lawful world was slipping away. And next, the desire to squeeze and hurt was overmastering. Then last, this statement was from Piggy. Nihilak na gud siya kay wala siya kabalogon sa ilang buhaton ba sa kalisod nga ilang giatubang kay kanang gihunt pod sila ni Jack. Ningon siya nga, we did everything just the way grown-ups would do. Why didn't it work? So part of Golding's intent was to demonstrate that the evil is not limited to specific groups of people or situations. On the island, the beast is manifest in the deadly tribal dances, war paint, and the manhunt. In the outside world, that same lust for power and control plays out as a nuclear war. So the people are slowly losing their innocence and justice. The people are slowly losing their innocence and justice is not valued anymore. In the kids scenario, there are no adults to enforce rules. Munang makaingon po dagway si Piggy nga, why didn't it work? Nga gibuhat naman nila ang tanan. So there are no there are no adults. Walay adults didto. So murag walay makabuyag, wala sila matuuhan ba kay silbi maumaura pud sila mga edad nya wala goy ingon nga wala goy mas taas-taas nila og maayong pangutok aw kana bang mas mas mature na gud unta og hunahuna. So in the kid scenario, there are no adults to enforce rules. That's why it's only a matter of time or circumstances before the children thought they can do something. It may be good or bad. Munang sa kariyot gud nga oras pwedeng na may tabong dili maayo, pwede pong may tabong maayo. Kay mga bata pagod sila, wala pagod sila kuan kayo alimuag sa kalibutan and the happenings in the world. So things would have been better if there are parents or an adult nga naka-survive along with the children. Diba? Bisan man lamang unta to if kanang driver or flight attendant nga makakuan unta nila, makatabang unta nila, samtang maghulat sila nga ma-rescue. Na kay unfortunately wala man. So next, here are some discussion questions that we are going to answer. So guys, if you have any ideas, feel free to comment nga sa comment section. So next, the first question, who do you think is the Lord of the Flies? For me, physically, the Lord of the Flies is the pig head that Jack, Roger, and the hunters mount on a sharpened stick and leave as an offering for the beast. Katong akong giingon ninyo kanina ipakita. The head is described as dripping blood, easily grinning, and attracting a swarm of buzzing flies. When the Lord of the Flies speaks to Simon, we can assume that his voice is a hallucinatory effect of Simon's disintegrating mental state. Kay niingon magud po dito guys nga si Simon kuno murag epileptic or I don't know kung sakto ba ako ang term basta kay naa siya ingaron nga mental kuanhan ng illness. Next is so muna to siya ningon ko nga it is the pig head nga ang Lord of the Flies. So the Lord of the Flies suggests to Simon that the boys will be their own undoing. Simon loses consciousness after the episode and is killed later that night. Later, when Roger and Jack vow to hunt and kill Ralph, they imply that they will repeat their offering to the beast, using Ralph's head this time. Symbolically, the Lord of the Flies represents the evil inside each one of the boys on the island. So makayon ka nga og wala gud ay na save si Ralph. Siya iya na gud unta dayong ulo pod ang pasok didto sa hait kaayo nga bugsay. So next, why is Ralph chosen to be the chief? If na mo answer guys, please comment your ideas. So ako ang answer ani is at Piggy's suggestion, Ralph uses a conch to call a meeting with all the boys stranded on the island. Diba? Yang higamit tong nakita ni Piggy nga conch. So Ralph then organizes the boys and suggests that they decide on a chief. Ralph is chosen because, as Golding observes, there was a stillness about Ralph as he sat that marked him out. There was his eyes and attractive appearance, and most obscurely, yet most powerfully, there was the conch. Ang conch magudto yung nagsilbi nga naghatag gud niya og power ba or kanang ability nga mulid sa ilaha nga sa group of children. So the being that had blown that had sat waiting for them on the platform with the delicate thing balanced on his knees was set apart. So the boys recognize Ralph as a natural leader and they associate them with civilization because the conch recalls the bull horns. So ila ko nung gi-associate si Ralph kay nakuno niya ang conch. So the bullhorns adults would have used to organize the boys back home. So next nato nga ansiran is ang number 3. So why is the backdrop of the war important to the story? So the backdrop of the war is important to the story because it is why the boys' plane is shot down. An event that kills the adults on the plane and leaves the surviving boys alone on the island. Later, when a dead pilot descends by the parachute onto the island like a sign came down from heaven, mura siya kay naatak mangud siya gikan sa taas ba. Nya mura siya og kuan ba, mura siya og hanang sinyalis nga murag pinadala siya sa kuan ba, gikan sa kalibutan kung asa na ay mga grown-ups. So the boys think the pilot is the beast, something to be feared. In a sense, the boys' idea is true because the pilot represents the brutality of war, which reveals the dark side of humanity. At the end of the story, the naval officers who rescues the boys seems to represent all that is orderly and civilized, but he also represents the death and destruction of war that underscore Golding's point about humanity's capacity for evil. Kay kaya man pud nilang mupatay, especially nga they are really obliged to kill during war para sa safety sa nation ug sa ilang family ug sa ilang kaugalingon. So next, can this novel about boys trapped on an island and discovering the darkness of human nature still be relevant today? For me, I would say yes, because when it comes to choosing the right person to be elected during the election, we should vote wisely and choose the one who who thinks about the safety and condition of humanity. So the novel Lord of the Flies is still relevant today kay there is still a very good chance of corruption of the world. And one thing that could cause the world to be corrupt is any war that could happen in the future or is currently happening today in this modern world. Kay ang uban nga nato nga country naman pod sila war nga ginaatubang or naa sila mga evil plans pod to create a war. So in today's political system, we are the boys who are trapped in the hands of unjust and dictator beasts. And the worst is there's much to discover in connection to the dark side of human. We know that being rescued wasn't really a salvation for the children. They were going back to a world that was just a bigger version of the island where people were giving into a savage nature and killing each other, di ba? Kay hato nga island sila ray naa. So makaingon ta nga sila ray magpatayanay. However, na-rescue na sila nga naapay ga kuan ba ongoing nga war. So murag makaingon ka nga mura na sila gipa kuan ato nga gamay nga island ba para masabak na pud sila sa realidad nga kalibutan nga kung asa na ay war, mas daghan pa ang evil doings nga imong mahimo, nga daghan pa kang mahuna-hunaan nga dili maayo or daghan pa ka nga anang ma-encounter nga mga challenges as you grow old and as you go on with life. So the last number is the last bullet. Why does Ralph cry at the end of the novel? Why had he never cried before? So based on the novel, it only said that Ralph started weeping followed by the little kids. So the rest of the older kids didn't weep at all. And I think it's because unlike Ralph and the younger boys, they have lost all innocence and they do not care about the tragedies that they have endured. Like wala ra to nila. Murag na okay na immune na mi. Murag normal na lang nila ba? Unlike ni Ralph nga anang inosente o ganahan gud siya og kanang mas ma-minimize gud unta ang mga anang dili maayo nga butang. So also as a leader for Ralph, murag you must not let your fellow men or your members to see that you are crying because they might say you are weak and doesn't have the capability to become a leader. I think muna yung reason nga nganong wala siya nagpakita nga gahilak siya or kuan kay mahadlok pud siya ingnon siya nga weak or ingnan siya nga wala siya capability to become a leader. So kay as a leader you must show to them that you are strong biya kay hanang makaingon pud sila nga ma-encourage pud sila nga magpakalig-on pud ta kay ang atuang leader gapakalig-on man pud para sa tanan ba sa kaayuhan sa tanan kay if a leader gani will always remember to kuan anang to be anang murag to see the positive side amidst the kuan ba kanang mga dili maayong butang murag kuan ba murag ikaw silbi gadala sa ilahang murag ikaw ilahang source of strength and hope kay mawad-an sila gana niya kay makakita sila nimo nga you are striving you are showing that you are strong so ma-encourage pud sila nga mo follow sa imuhang mga yapak so ikaw gahatag nila og kusog pag-asa og kahayag so maura to siya sa ako ang part maura pud to akong mga answer sa questions if naamoy ganahan nga i-add pod you can add please comment in the comment section sa atuang G class ra. So for further access sa amo ang topic sa ako ang topic nganing The Lord of the Flies, I have here a link of a PDF format and a YouTube video. Mo ni siya whole video, good complete full movie gud ni siya. Then kani siya mura ra ni siya kuan ba summary ra unta. So I think these are our references, among ikuan og source sa amo ang topic. So thank you. And do you have any questions of us? Feel free to comment sa G-class. Okay, we will try our best to answer it. And see you next time.